Here, down this alley, is a young boy getting ready to witness one of the most traumatic events of his life. He, no older than 12 years old, is surrounded by other children his age and older, and they're all watching a fight. A fight that was completely preventable, but with no adult supervision around. There was no one with a clear head to de-escalate the situation. All this chaos over a stolen bike and dueling egos. One of the boys had gotten the best of the other, and in response, a knife was pulled. The boy who'd been losing lashed out, cutting the winner on the arm. But then a fourth child kicked the attacker from behind, and the blade plunged deep into the winner's chest. And the young boy, the one standing frozen nearby, watched as his best friend slowly began to lose his life. As his eyes went blank, the trauma had already settled in. He had just watched his best friend die right in front of him, but this wouldn't be the first or last time he witnessed such agony. This was the moment that would eventually lead him to join one of the greatest boy bands of all time. And that's when the real chaos begins. As I always like to do in stories like these, I'd like to issue a trigger warning. This documentary contains real events involving childhood trauma, violence, substance abuse, essay, and death. It is not told for shock value. It is told because some boys don't grow up to be broken men by accident. They become that way when nobody protects them. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Before the chaos, before the hits, before the name Bobby Brown meant anything to the world, there was just a boy raised in war, not in some distant battlefield, but in Boston, in the Orchard Park projects of Roxbury, where life was loud, fast, unforgiving. And for Bobby Brown, the only thing more dangerous than the streets was what was waiting inside his home, as you know how we all knew him. He was the bad boy, the wild one, the one we blamed. But why? Why did we blame him? And why did he go along with it? There's many reasons for what made Bobby Brown, Bobby Brown. The good, the bad, and the hideously ugly life he'd led. But how did his life, his image, his world become so destructive at not one, but several moments in time? And the true question is, did he ever really come back from it? Well, there's several reasons that made Robert Brown the wild Bobby Brown. And we're going to explore them all because Bobby Brown wasn't just fighting addiction. He was fighting the world, the labels, the losses, the system, the silence, and underneath it all was just a boy who was never protected. This is the story of every war Bobby Brown had to survive, even when it was with himself. Before the world knew the king of stage or the bad boy of R&B, there was just a boy, Robert Beresford Brown, born February 5th, 1969, in the unforgiving trenches of Roxbury, Massachusetts, a predominantly black section of Boston where poverty, violence, and resilience coexisted in a chaotic rhythm. Bobby was the seventh of 8 children raised in the Orchard Park projects, an area often referred to by locals as the Bricks. His mother, Carol Elizabeth, was a substitute teacher, and his father, Herbert James Brown, was a construction worker, both working-class parents doing the best they could in an environment that chewed up childhood and spit it out rough-edged. But the Browns kept a tight-knit family as tight as they could given the environment. Bobby, who always admired his father as the funniest man he ever knew, recognized that even though his father was productive, it was his mother that damn near wore the pants in the house. She was the quote-unquote executioner while Herbert could be quite passive. And sometimes, it seems, she would take advantage of that by doing things to humiliate him in front of the Brown children. Herbert, although a funny and loving man, was quite easily squeamish about things, and Carol used to play into it by throwing snakes and spiders on him in front of the children, causing him to scream and cower into fear while the children laughed. Doing things like that set a standard that it was mom to be feared and that dad was passive. This would play into toxic roles later on in Bobby's life, and unfortunately it seems Bobby's own mother contributed to that. But his mother, Carol, was beloved around the neighborhood because she was a hustler and giving in so many ways. Bobby described his mother as an incredible cook, as she sold meals to the neighborhood families and was able to make money on the side. But that wasn't her only way of making extra ends meet. But we'll come back to this soon. Because Carol was such a great cook, she wanted to teach her children independence, so she taught Bobby how to fry chicken. Bobby wanted to make his mom proud by cooking for her and the family, so while he was alone, he grabbed the flour out of the cabinet and began prepping his meal. As the chicken fried, he realized that the smell was repugnant, chemical even, but he didn't think much of it. But it was after he ate the chicken that he knew something was wrong. He felt weird afterwards, and when his mother came home, she realized what happened. She didn't say anything, but she knew exactly what had happened. Her son had accidentally fried their chicken with cocaine. Bobby would only realize this later on down the line when he found out that his mother wasn't just making money selling dinners. She was selling dope too. His mother seemingly put her family in danger often by making reckless decisions. She allowed the hoodlums of the neighborhood to spend the nights with them, often sleeping on their floors. One day, the police came to the Browns' apartment looking for one of the hoodlums she was harboring, asking if she knew who and where they were. Instead of just saying no, she became irate and began cussing them out. They turned to leave, and Carol decided to follow the cops, who were already leaving, out to their car and continued to berate them. Bobby watched from the window as the police jumped out of the car and began to beat the brakes off of her. They busted and blacked her eye before arresting her and taking her to jail. This traumatized Bobby. Bobby said seeing the cops do this to his mom completely ruined his relationship with the police and authority, even to this day, because there was no one else home. Dad was at work and siblings were out. Bobby and his youngest sister were taken away by child services. They placed Bobby in a Catholic church, and it's there where a priest tried to take advantage of him. Bobby, not liking what was happening to him, punched the priest in the face repeatedly and ran away. Thankfully for him, the charges were dropped against his mother, and she came back home. But as traumatized as he was, he never even told his mom about what happened in the Catholic Church. But this situation really affected Bobby in ways that would come back to haunt him later on in life, and keeping this a secret would only make it worse for him. Things seemed to always escalate with Bobby and his family. They were known as a bad family who took no shit. Basically, nobody better mess with them Browns, and Carol made sure they were that way. Her disciplinary methods were very violent, beating Bobby, who stayed in trouble with anything and everything she could get her hands on. Something that unfortunately a lot of black children can identify with. Parents who beat them with extension cords or tree switches or anything that packs a punch. But none of that stopped the mischievous Bobby from continuing to do what he wanted, and one of the things he wanted to do was steal. Bobby was basically a kleptomaniac. He stole anything he could get his hands on, and of course this would escalate into another bad situation. When Bobby was 10 years old, he was sent down south to Alabama to visit his grandmother for the summer, and while he was there, he went to a local mom and pop store. When he came inside, the owner called him the N-word and told him to get out of his store. 10-year-old Bobby went back to his grandparents' house and he grabbed a rifle. He went back to the store and pointed the rifle at the owner and yelled, "Who's the N-word now?" Since he felt he had the power now, little Bobby decided to rob the store. Instead of stealing money, he stole snacks and candy. After he left the store, he started walking back to his grandparents' house, and on his way there, his father saw him and he saw the gun. He pulled Bobby over, and when he found out what happened and what that could mean in a state like Alabama, the usually meek, passive father, Herbert, beat the brakes off Bobby and forced him to go back to the store and return the snacks. While father and son were driving back to the grandparents' house, Bobby, hating being in the extremely racist Alabama, told his father that he hated it there and that he never wanted to come back. And his father, understanding that, said okay and never forced him to come back. And Bobby didn't go back to Alabama until 1981 when his grandmother died. It was after this trip of laying his grandmother to rest that the Browns made their way back home to Roxbury, where Bobby, who'd already experienced quite a lot at such a young age, was about to experience one of the most traumatic events that would change his life. It was the summer of 1981, and Bobby had just gotten back from his trip from Alabama. Excited to be back home, Bobby went looking for his best friend, Jimmy Flint. Problem is that Jimmy was a neighborhood bully. He had a bad reputation, and a lot of the kids were afraid of him. So of course, this is who Bobby would choose to be friends with. Jimmy helped to bring out the already rebellious side of Bobby, and the two got up to no good. They both got the great idea to go to the middle-class neighborhood called Dorchester, and their mission was to steal bikes. While they stalked the neighborhood, they spotted 2 bikes they liked and stole them, riding just as quickly out of the neighborhood as they'd come. After returning back to their side of town, the youngsters found out there was a house party with older kids happening, and they wanted to be a part of it. The 2 12-year-old boys went in and partied. By the time they came back outside, Jimmy saw that a young Puerto Rican boy was sitting on his bike. Jimmy, who was hot-headed and took no disrespect, said, "Get the fuck off my bike." The young Puerto Rican boy said, "Make me." Bobby explained in his autobiography, Every Little Step, that in their neighborhood, the blacks and the Puerto Ricans were beefing. So what was about to happen wasn't new, but it just shouldn't have happened to one so young. Jimmy began beating the Puerto Rican boy up and was getting the best of him. Kids, excited to witness a fight, ran out to watch. The Puerto Ricans were on one side cheering their boy on, and the blacks were cheering Jimmy on. Because Jimmy was getting the best of him, one of the Puerto Ricans gave their boy a knife, and he slashed Jimmy's arm with it. One of the kids from Jimmy's crew kicked the Puerto Rican boy in the back, which caused him to lunge forward and accidentally plunge the knife into Jimmy's chest. The Puerto Ricans fled, and the kids tried to run to get help, but it was way too late. Bobby watched in stunned shock as the life of his best friend left his eyes. Bobby wrote how this event deeply impacted him, saying, "He passed away looking at me. I will never forget his face when he took his last breath." And as traumatic as this event was, this sparked a fire in Bobby. He said that after losing Jimmy, he intensely wanted to leave the Orchard Park projects, and the only thing he could think to achieve that was to do music. So music would become his refuge and escape route. He started going to the local Boys and Girls Club to perform at local talent shows. Bobby was a natural entertainer. He was magnetic, a street-smart, wild, charismatic kid with raw talent and a spark that couldn't be dulled. He sang hits from Michael Jackson's Off the Wall album and would often woo the crowd with his presence. That spark in him would eventually catch the attention of 2 other boys from the neighborhood who shared his love for music, Michael Bivins and Ricky Bell. Bobby already knew them from the neighborhood. They weren't best friends, but they were familiar faces. And like Bobby, they were scrappy, ambitious, and could sing. So they linked up. No name, no money. Just 3 boys, a boombox, and the Jackson 5 running on loop. They studied everything, how to hit harmonies, when to move, how to glide across the floor like they were born with it. They'd post up at local talent shows, community centers, block parties, anywhere with a mic and someone willing to watch. And they weren't polished. They weren't even always good, but they were hungry. And sometimes hunger is louder than talent, but they were missing something. And pretty soon they found exactly what they needed. That's when Ralph Tresvant entered the picture. Ricky had been singing with Ralph on the side. Ralph was different, clean voice, natural frontman energy, the kind of kid who could hit the high notes with no effort and still smile through it. Bobby wasn't always happy about sharing the spotlight, but even he had to admit Ralph was the missing piece. So now they were 4. Then came Brooke Payne, a local choreographer, manager, and the first adult to see something in them that was more than just a hobby. He tightened them up, made them rehearse like it was boot camp, polished their stage presence, and gave them a new name, New Edition, symbolizing that they were the new edition of boy groups after the Jackson 5. But even as they were becoming a group, Bobby felt something off. Not in the music, in the mirror. He was darker than the rest of them, not just in skin tone, but in the way they treated him. It started as jokes, roasting, snapping, the kind of thing boys do to each other when they're bored or insecure. But the jokes always hit him differently because they always sounded the same. You black dummy, charcoal, burnt, you ugly. And Bobby laughed with them. What else was he supposed to do? That's what kids do when they're hurt. You wear the insult before it wears you. One day, while they were all watching Soul Train together, Bobby, wide-eyed, said out loud, "One day I'ma be on there." And just like that, one of the boys shut him down. "Man, shut up. You ain't going on there, you black dummy." The room erupted in laughter, but Bobby sat there, burning, not from anger, from shame. Even Ricky, who was also dark-skinned, joined in sometimes. Because that's how it worked. If you were going to survive, you had to pass the pain to somebody else. And Bobby, he became the punching bag. Plus, they were echoing what he already felt about himself. He had already thought he was black and ugly, gap-toothed, unappealing. They just confirmed it. But soon that dynamic would shift the moment Brooke Payne said they needed one more thing, a fifth member, someone to round out the group visually, vocally, and energetically. So Brooke brought in his nephew, Ronnie DeVoe. Ronnie was older, smoother, taller, and noticeably lighter skinned than the rest of them. And just like that, the teasing stopped. Nobody called him a black dummy. Nobody questioned if he'd make it on Soul Train. He was respected from the jump because, to them, his looks trumped all of theirs. Suddenly, Bobby wasn't the punchline anymore, but the sting lingered. Because now the message was loud and clear. You weren't enough. But now that we got Ronnie, now it looks right. Ronnie's addition tightened their look, gave them that polished symmetry, and more importantly, it gave Brooke what he needed, a complete package. From there, Brooke whipped them into shape. He trained them like drill sergeants, sharp moves, tight vocals, endless repetition. He didn't let them slack. He didn't let them get lazy. And even though Bobby acted out sometimes deep down, he respected Brooke. Because for once, someone was pushing him toward something instead of punishing him. In 1982, by the time they hit the stage at the Strand Theater in Boston for the Hollywood Talent Night, they were ready. They didn't win. But someone in the crowd saw what they didn't. Maurice Starr, a local producer with big dreams and even bigger ambition, locked eyes on them and saw dollar signs. He wasn't looking for perfection. He was looking for potential. And to him, they were it. Maurice Starr saw everything he needed to see. 5 black boys with charisma, Jackson 5-style harmonies, and raw energy. He didn't need polish. He could provide that. What he needed was potential. And in Bobby, Ralph, Ricky, Mike, and Ronnie, he saw gold. Maurice signed them to his label, Streetwise Records, and immediately got them in the studio. They began recording what would become their debut album, The Sound Bubblegum Soul, a mix of youthful voices, Motown inspiration, and tracks, written and produced almost entirely by Starr. The first single, Candy Girl, in 1983. It was high-pitched, catchy, and sweet as hell, almost too sweet for what these boys had already lived through, but it worked. It took off in the UK first, hitting #1 on the charts, and then started burning through American radio. And just like that, they were on. New Edition was suddenly everywhere. Television shows, small concerts, photo shoots, and music videos. They were being treated like stars, but not paid like them. Not yet. But even though they were starting to make major moves, none of this stopped Bobby from being Bobby or kept him out of trouble. In the middle of all the newly found fame, the rehearsals, the tight schedules, and the press appearances, Bobby still found time to act up. At just 14 years old, Bobby got arrested for riding a moped without a license. But because of his age, they couldn't place him in a men's facility. So they made what would be a huge mistake. They thought he'd be safer in a women's jail instead, and that's where things went left. While sitting in that cell, Bobby was recognized by one of the inmates, an older woman who just so happened to be a 20-year-old friend of his older sister, Tina. She had seen Bobby on TV, heard Candy Girl on the radio, and instead of just saying hi, she turned the moment into something inappropriate and predatory. They found a hidden corner of the facility and did the do. She crossed a line, and in that cell, he wasn't a star. He was a child, and even though he thought it was okay to do, nobody protected him again. And things like that would only continue as he got older and his star continued to rise. While on tour, the women and groupies were vicious. They did not care how old these boys were. New Edition was surrounded by women who were as eager to give their daughters up as well as themselves to these guys who weren't even megastars yet. But none of that mattered. These women snuck backstage with their daughters, and while the other boys of the group were hesitant on whether they should partake in these activities with them, Bobby dove headfirst, and he didn't even want the daughters. He wanted the moms, and they obliged. But it was more psychological than just Bobby being an oversexed young boy. He was trying to prove a point. Because he'd been made fun of for so long for his looks, he wanted to show everyone that a quote-unquote black and ugly dude can get panties and lots of them. And he applied that logic to everything he did. He went overboard in his performances, behavior, clothes, etc. to prove to everyone that he was worthy. After Candy Girl blew up, the group hit the road, touring internationally, doing press in other languages, being swarmed by fans, and hearing their voices blast through hotel TVs and car stereos. They were everywhere, except in their own bank accounts. When they came home from the tour, the boys were handed their first official payout, a check for $1.87 each, not per hour, not per show, total. It wasn't a glitch, it wasn't a mistake. It was the reality of how the deal had been structured. Because here's what most people didn't realize. New Edition was never signed directly to the record label MCA. They were signed to Jump and Shoot Productions, who had their own deal with MCA. That meant Jump and Shoot got the money, and New Edition got whatever Jump and Shoot decided to give them. According to Bobby, his problem was never really Maurice Starr. It was Jump and Shoot, the middlemen, who had all the control and none of the accountability. The duo even joked about it, saying, "Everyone's got to get scammed in this business at least once." They thought it was funny. The boys didn't, especially Bobby. So despite New Edition's success, the group had been exploited, like many young black artists before them. Tensions started rising, especially for Bobby, whose personality didn't fit the mold of a tightly controlled cookie-cutter boy band member. He was the live wire, the joker, the bad boy with a hunger for more spotlight. And as the group continued to produce hits like Popcorn Love, Cool It Now, and Mr. Telephone Man, the internal divide grew. Bobby was jealous of Ralph's frontman role, and the label executives often tried to tame him, cutting his solos, editing his vocals, even dressing him down in interviews. But Bobby couldn't be tamed, and he refused to shrink for anyone. He began acting out, missing rehearsals, being late to shows, and lashing out during interviews. Some fans chalked it up to ego, but those closest knew it was deeper. Bobby was fighting for identity, autonomy, and validation in a system that tried to neuter his flame. And of course, once again, his flame would get him burned. Once, while New Edition was taking a break from touring, they were back at home in the Orchard Park projects where there was a block party. Bobby, who was only 14, was dating a girl that was a part of a dance group that opened for New Edition on the road. Her name was Kim. Problem is that Kim, who was also 14, had an 18-year-old ex-boyfriend named Timmy, and Timmy was a neighborhood thug. While Bobby and Kim were dancing, suddenly Kim became scared and warned Bobby that Timmy was there and that he should leave. Bobby, never backing down from anyone, said he wasn't going anywhere and continued dancing up on her. Ralph and the other group members saw the static that was potentially about to happen and suggested to Bobby that they leave. And once again, Bobby refused. So his group mates left, and before he knew it, Timmy was right behind him. Timmy basically tried to punk Bobby by starting a fight over Kim, and Bobby didn't back down. But Timmy left, and when he returned with a gun and began firing shots through the crowd, aiming specifically for Bobby. Bobby zoomed out of there. He'd run so fast and his adrenaline was pumping so hard that he didn't even realize that he'd been shot. He was shot in the leg, and he was rushed to urgent care. Thankfully for him, it was only a flesh wound. The bullet went straight through and didn't hit any major arteries. he was able to go back home where he actually had his own apartment that was attached to his parents' apartment. He snuck in there and kept the fact that he was shot away from his parents. But he made sure to tell his group members. He bragged about getting shot and surviving it, and he called them punks for running away. He felt like a bad boy, and this was a dope notch on his belt. Bobby also said being shot somehow made him a better dancer. He said that it somehow allowed him to do weird and crazy things with his legs and improved his performances. So because wild things like this kept happening, management recognized that Bobby was a loose cannon and they wanted to get rid of him. By 1985, tensions boiled over. Bobby was either kicked out or left, depending on who's telling the story. But in turn, Bobby felt constrained being in the group. So he rebelled and started doing whatever he wanted. He continued to act out, doing no shows, hogging the spotlight, and being extremely disrespectful to everyone. Things started to come to a head. Bobby and his fellow group member Michael got into a fist fight because Mike's foot got ran over, and because everyone laughed at him, Mike spit in Bobby's face. And they began fighting viciously. It went from the bus to the venue, and eventually sabotage happened on stage. During what was supposed to be Bobby's solo, someone cut his microphone mid-song, and when he looked off to the side of the stage, he saw Mike laughing. So Bobby threw the microphone at him and he quit the tour and the group right then. And that was the last time he performed with New Edition as a group for a decade. One thing was certain, Bobby Brown was no longer in New Edition. He finally got out, but what now? After Bobby stormed out of New Edition, one thing was clear, he was free. No more group rules, no more polished choreography. But freedom's funny like that. You can be free and still not know where the hell you're going. And Bobby? He was only 16, with a reputation, a chip on his shoulder, and something to prove. At just 16, Bobby signed a solo deal with MCA Records, the same label that distributed New Edition, fulfilling a promise they'd made to him earlier. In November of 1986, he released his debut solo album, King of the Stage. It produced a standout R&B single, Girlfriend, which went to number 1 on the R&B charts and peaked at number 57 on the Billboard Hot 100. But as a whole, the album was considered a commercial disappointment, failing to make substantial crossover waves, though critics noted Bobby's promise and personality shining through the production. Not bad, not great, just invisible, especially compared to what New Edition was still doing, and Bobby knew it. He wasn't trying to be fine. He wanted revenge. He wanted headlines. He wanted to make every single person who ever called him the Black Dummy eat their damn words. But it was going to take some time. And while the music was still getting its footing, life didn't wait, and Bobby's recklessness didn't stop. Bobby got arrested. Again. At the time, he was dating a girl named Malika Williams, the sister of Ralph Tresvant's sister Mona. While visiting her in LA, they were staying in a hotel with friends when Malika decided to sneak her father's Lincoln out for the night. Problem was, neither of them had a driver's license. Malika handed Bobby the keys. He drove. The police caught them. They were both arrested. Bobby had just enough money to bail himself out, but not Malika. She got out eventually. But according to Bobby, the drama of it all, the hotel, the cops, the bad boy energy only turned her on even more. And that night, she got all of him. Malika ended up pregnant, and Bobby, barely 17, became a father. His son Landon Brown was born in 1986. Now Bobby had a baby, a solo career that wasn't catching fire yet, and the weight of providing for a child before he could even legally buy a drink. He didn't talk about it much in the media, but it mattered. Because now the pressure wasn't just about fame, it was about legacy. It was, don't end up like the men who failed you. Bobby believed becoming a father would make him a better man. He thought it would force him to grow up, to work harder, to hustle like never before. And in a twisted way, he was right. After licking his wounds and laying low, Bobby linked up with the Dream Team, L.A. Reid, Babyface, and Teddy Riley. Together they cooked up what would become Don't Be Cruel, the blueprint for what we now call New Jack Swing. This wasn't polite, this wasn't bubblegum, this was aggressive, sexy, loud, raw. This was Bobby in full form. The album dropped in June of 1988, and at first it crept in. But then it exploded. It debuted at number 74, but soon climbed to number 1 on the Billboard 200, making Bobby the youngest male artist with a studio album at number 1 since Stevie Wonder. It went 7 times platinum, 5 top 10 hits, including My Prerogative and Every Little Step. Bobby Brown wasn't just back, he was everywhere. The kid they wanted out of the group, he became bigger than the group. But with all that fame came a new beast. On stage, Bobby was unpredictable, wild, sexual, gritty. He didn't just sing, he provoked. He wasn't trying to be polished, he was trying to be powerful. Every hip thrust, every ad-lib, every off-script move was Bobby internally screaming, "I'm not the ugly one anymore. I'm not the joke. I am the show." And for a while, he was. But storms were building. Bobby was about to go from free to spiraling. But even as Don't Be Cruel cemented his status, Bobby's internal war raged on. His teen rebellion had evolved, and now it played out on massive global stages. His solo rise wasn't just about music, it was about bottling anger, insecurity, and hunger into defiance and swagger. His stage presence became provocative, untamed, a need to perform authority rather than mere artistry. The money came fast, the women came faster, and Bobby, he didn't slow down for either. By now, Bobby Brown had transformed from the scrappy project kid of Roxbury to a full-blown R&B sex symbol. And with that came access, not just to wealth, but to bodies, everywhere. From hotels to backstage rooms, women lined up, and Bobby didn't hesitate. Regular women, famous women, wild women, women with nothing to lose and everything to give, just to say they had him. This wasn't just a young man enjoying success. Bobby was on a mission. A revenge tour for every time someone told him he wasn't good enough, attractive enough, light enough. All those years of being called black dummy, charcoal, burnt, of being laughed at by his own group members. Now, Bobby didn't just want to sleep with women. He wanted to prove something with them, and no conquest meant more than Janet. Yes, Janet Jackson. They had a secret relationship in the late 80s. Janet was with someone else publicly, Renee Elizondo Jr., but privately she was tangled up with Bobby. And to him it felt like fate. He'd been in love with her since she was Penny on Good Times. She was everything, famous, beautiful, desired, and somehow she wanted him, but only on her terms. The relationship was private for a reason. Janet didn't want the world to know, and Bobby knew why. She loved me, he would later write in his book, but she wasn't in love with me. And worse, after a session of making hot, passionate love, she said her father wouldn't let her be with a black man. Bobby said, "Let that sink in. Not a broke man, not a criminal, a black man." This hit Bobby deeper than any industry scam, any cut mic, any label rejection. Because this wasn't about business, this was about worth. And in that moment, naked, humiliated, and enraged, he kicked her out of their hotel room, butt naked, only being courteous enough to throw her a blanket to slightly cover up. That moment scarred him because it confirmed what the world had always told him. You're good enough to sleep with, but not good enough to stay with. So Bobby doubled down, tripled down. He spiraled. There was wild, freaky bathroom sex with Madonna. He dated singer Karen White, adult film stars, little people who he also had weird, freaky acts with, and countless others. Bobby wasn't just having sex, he was performing it, proving it, using it like armor, like a weapon, trying to show the world that yes, even he, the ugly one, the burnt one, could have anyone. But what started as power quickly turned into emptiness. The more he had, the less it filled, because no matter how many women he slept with, the echo of Janet's rejection and everything it symbolized stayed with him. And Bobby Brown, now a solo artist with a baby and a breakout album, was still chasing validation in places that couldn't love him back. but there was one who would absolutely love him back for better or worse, and boy, did it get worse. This was just the beginning. Bobby Brown's life was already loud, raw, and out of control. But what's coming next? We'll take everything you thought you knew and burn it down. In part 2, Bobby meets Whitney, and what looks like love turns into one of the messiest, most misunderstood relationships in music history. It only gets deeper from here. Hit subscribe, hit the comments, and stay tuned. Part 2's coming real soon.